Well, it's 5:03. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to the third panel discussion series, Beyond Rooftop Solar. Tonight we'll be talking about siting for commercial solar energy generation in the greater Cazenovia area. And more specifically, we'll be talking about solar development on agricultural lands. My name is Jen Wong. I'm the Executive Director of CPF, and we have three panelists here with us tonight. Michaela Ruiz-Ramon from New York, from the American Farmland Trust. Jason Mulford is here representing New York State Department of Ag and Markets. And Luke Gianforte, partner in Gianforte Farms, and an alternate on the Town of Cazenovia ZBA is here tonight as well. We'll do those of you who are veterans of this series, we'll run through a few nuts and bolts here, a few logistics, and then we'll get going. As you heard, the session is being recorded. As a reminder, please make sure that you place yourself on mute if you are not speaking, so that we can improve the audio quality for everyone. If your internet connection is unstable, consider turning off your video feed and just following the audio feed, or dialing in on a mobile phone for that audio. The format, each of our presenters will speak for about 12 minutes or so tonight, and we'll try to save lots of room for some questions and discussion at the end. You're welcome to submit your questions in the chat at any time. If you have questions along the way and you're worried you'll forget them if you wait all the way till the end. So please feel free to submit questions in the chat. If your question is for a particular speaker, if you can indicate that, that would help us out. So a little background on this series, if you're a newcomer to one of these discussions. As I mentioned, it's the third in a series of 4 planned events hosted by the Cazenovia Preservation Foundation, the Cazenovia Area Community Development Association, United Climate Action Network, and the Chamber of Commerce. As we saw a growing interest in activity with regard to commercial solar development in our area and began having conversations within our organization and with others in the community, we recognized that there was a broad range of opinions and also range of knowledge on the subject. So we reached out to some partner organizations and discussed the topic a little further. And this is the series that we're bringing to you tonight to help provide some additional opportunities for education and community forum around what is probably going to be the biggest issue in comprehensive and landscape planning in central New York for many years to come. The first session was held in late June. The goal of that session was to provide a broad framework and build a common base of knowledge within the community so that we could continue to engage in meaningful discussion and more detailed discussion about specific aspects of solar development. The second session was held later that year, focused on geospatial data tools developed by Scenic Hudson and refined for the Cazenovia area by CPF through a partnership with Colgate University's Upstate Institute. And the idea was to help consider some of the complexities around solar siting and support the town of Cazenovia's process of reviewing its solar code. If you missed either of those sessions, you can find recordings for those on the Beyond Rooftop Solar website, part of the CPF website. And we will post this session there shortly after the presentation as well. Tonight you'll hear from 3 presenters about some of the unique considerations related to commercial solar development on agricultural lands. We hope you find tonight's presentation interesting, informing, and engaging. Our first speaker tonight is Michaela Ruiz-Ramon. She's the New York State Policy Coordinator for the American Farmland Trust. American Farmland Trust recently released a report on solar siting in New York State, and she's going to provide us with some of the highlights from that document. Michaela, welcome.
I'll take it from here. Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here with all of you this evening. Excited to get to talk about one of my current favorite topics, smart solar siting on farmland. So I'm gonna get my screen up here. We're good, Jen? Looks good. It's up.
That looks great. Thank you.
Wish they had like a little like check how it comes across on other screens. So as Jen said, I'm Michaela. This paper was also co-authored by my wonderful colleagues, Samantha Levy and Ethan Winter. So I want to give due credit to them for their awesome work on this with me. It was a great project. So just as an overview of American Farmland Trust, if you're not familiar with us, we are a nationwide organization working at the intersection of conservation and agriculture and farm viability. Our New York office is based up in Saratoga Springs, but we work on statewide policy and also do a bunch of other projects across the state with our Genesee Watershed Demonstration Network in Western New York and our Women for the Land learning circles. So the three pillars of what we're about and what guides our approach to what we do is first protecting the land that sustains us, helping to promote sound farming practices, and finally keeping farmers on the land, recognizing that there is a huge intergenerational transition underway in New York. So we see these as the three pillars of making sure that agriculture stays strong and around for a long time to come. So a brief overview on just kind of where we're at with solar in New York. Many of you are likely familiar, perhaps in passing, with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. This was passed in 2019, and it put several ambitious goals into law. Among them, 70% renewable energy by 2030, which is really driving a lot of solar development across the state. Right now, we're at about 27%, so a little less than a third. And of that 27%, the vast majority is coming from hydropower, with only about 3% really coming from existing solar energy. To get to 70% by 2030, we're looking at somewhere around 9 gigawatts of large-scale solar, 10 gigawatts for distributed generation solar, which is basically just to say there's going to be a lot of solar, big scale, small scale, everything in between. How much we really need at the end of the day is a bit of a question mark still. It depends on the electrification of vehicles, of buildings, of heating, and kind of various different industries that are trying to electrify. So we expect kind of the total energy that we need to go up by as much as 65 to 80% by 2050, which means that there's already a big need for solar, and it's probably just going to keep getting bigger. There's a lot in the pipeline already of projects that have been proposed, the largest of which at the moment is a 500 megawatt project in Genesee County. That's on about 3,000 acres of farmland. That's the biggest we've seen so far in New York. Most projects are a little bit smaller compared to what they're seeing out in the Midwest and Illinois, for example. So here's an early snapshot of where solar installations have already taken place. This is based off of research published by some Cornell researchers evaluating where we're seeing a lot of these smaller community scale solar projects. And what we're seeing is that it's going on farmland. Obviously, many of you know this, that's why you're here, but we're seeing this confirmed in the data with 44% of existing solar projects going on cropland or pasture land. And we're also seeing that almost 60% of those projects are going on what we would consider good soil. A lot of that is prime farmland. We're also seeing that in this Cornell paper, that 84% of land in New York that is considered most suitable to solar is agricultural land. So we really see this key challenge getting set up here as we try and build more solar development. How can we scale up solar while avoiding binary trade-offs with active farming and food production and also generating energy? So here's a map, two maps for you. The one on the left with the green, this shows where some of New York's best farmland is located. So this really dark green color, you see it clustered right around where you are, Finger Lakes into central New York, but also we see this farmland across the state. Then if you compare this to the map on the right, this map shows where a lot of proposed solar is. This is a snapshot in time from August of last year. So these are all of the projects that have been submitted to the New York Independent State Operator for connection to the grid. So these are not projects that are permitted or being built, they're just proposed. So this is not a baked cake, but we can see that we're really seeing a lot of overlap between our really great farmland. Oops, I'm missing a, sorry about that. Our really great farmland and where we're seeing these dark red clusters, which is where we have the highest amount of proposed solar. So the point of our report was really to do a deep dive into this land use dynamic with an eye towards understanding both the opportunities and the risks of such a large scale change in land use, and looking at a way to raise the voice of the agricultural community to help inform future phases of the energy transition. Our underlying principle is this is coming, it's going to happen. What's the best way that we can navigate this? Because solar and farmland are not necessarily in opposition. So our project, we had a bunch of surveys that we did. We were talking with farmers and land trusts and environmental organizations and municipal officials from towns and counties across the state. We also did some roundtables to have some in-person discussion, and then also working with both NYSERDA and Department of Agriculture and Markets to get feedback throughout this process. So some of the key findings, just to go through these briefly, because I know you want to hear about the framework, but definitely some mixed impact to farm viability in terms of what people think is going to happen, particularly farmers. And we're seeing that the feelings are not necessarily positive, especially in central New York. There were in fact no positive responses about, solar siting is going to be good for farm viability. We're seeing a lot of hesitation and skepticism and a lot of concern. When we asked why individuals would consider hosting solar for farmers that are already hosting solar, which was just 43 respondents in our surveys, a little more than a third were interested in passing the farm to the next generation, about a quarter interested in combating climate change. Obviously, income is a huge motivator. And we see that too with farmers that are not currently hosting solar, but would consider it. Again, income and farm transfer. Also interestingly, some interest in agrivoltaics, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then if there's no successor to pass the farm on to. When we asked about expected impact of solar to the farm, so again, with farmers currently hosting the projects, these are small scale, seeing that the operation is going to continue or this is having no impact. For a little under a quarter, saying that the operation might shrink a little bit. And for those interested in hosting solar, a lot more uncertainty about what exactly this means when you put solar on farms, especially these large scale projects. Another key piece from our research is what are the impacts of solar siting on farmer renters, all the farmers that lease land. We see that in the Mohawk Valley and Central New York, over 25% of farmers that we surveyed reported that land to rent was becoming scarcer. Between 16 and 22% of farmers in almost all regions of the state reported that land is becoming more expensive to rent because of solar. We're also seeing in the Mohawk Valley and the North Country that about 15% of farmers reported losing access to land that they used to rent. This is in large part because solar developers can outcompete farmer renters or just farmers looking to lease land by many orders of magnitude. Instead of paying $30 an acre, $1,000 an acre, $1,300, $2,000. I've heard as high as $2,500 an acre. So it's really quite drastic, the difference. We see this particularly play out with the dairy industry. Dairy farmers reported being contacted by solar developers, more negatively impacted, losing access to land. And we see that play out more broadly. Ignore the quotes, I'll give you the takeaways. But really, it's this complex problem of how do we navigate we don't want to lose all this land, but also solar can really help farmers. It's a huge source of income that can really help farmers invest in their operations. So it is not all bad. It can be very good, but it has to be done strategically. So how do we do that? This is where smart solar siting comes in. Basically, in a nutshell, it's recognizing that solar can cut two ways. It can be really good, it can be really bad. We don't want to slow down renewable energy development because we need it. We need this energy from this clean source. But we also don't want unrestricted siting on farmland that doesn't pay attention to the value of farmland for our economies, for our rural communities, for food production, for the very vital reasons. So what we did in our report is we proposed a smart solar siting mitigation framework that had three parts. The first one was basically, let's classify solar projects based off of what soils they're impacting. We want to protect our best farmland. So the more of your project that is on this really high quality farmland, the higher the mitigation cost that you have to pay per acre. We think mitigation fees should be tied to the cost to protect farmland. The second piece is to say, all right, there's the stick, here's the carrot. If you are a solar developer and you are paying attention to cultivating healthy soils and good soils practices, if you're working with a farmer to design your project to support their operation, if that's agrivoltaics or if that's grazing of livestock, we really want to support that. Those are great things. We want to see those continue. And so you can get a discount on how much money you're being asked to pay as a fee for impacting good farmland. And then the final piece is implementation and verification, which is not as exciting, but very important. So just, I can answer more questions on this later, did not time myself well. But in a nutshell, the difference between our framework and existing mitigation frameworks is it costs a lot more money for developers, so there's a stronger price signal to reconsider how and where they're siting their projects. And we also want to encourage these kinds of activities of supporting farm viability, working with farmers to design projects, making sure that projects are supporting soil health. And so we're trying to disincentivize the bad and encourage the good, so that we can really strike this balance of smart solar siting. And that, in a nutshell, is our framework, with using the funds to support continued farmland protection and putting the money back into protecting farmland and farm viability. And that's what I have.
Great, thank you very much, Michaela. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those ideas a little bit and explore a bit more in the Q&A session. But before we do that, let's go ahead and move on to our second panelist tonight. Jason Mulford is joining us from the Department of Agriculture and Markets, Division of Land and Water. He's a senior environmental analyst there. And we invited him tonight because we wanted to hear a little bit about his perspective at being a representative of a state agency, and how is Ag and Markets reconciling the need for meeting New York State's ambitious renewable energy targets with its role in farmland protection. So Jason, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I have a detailed presentation prepared for you, but I believe that I have only a portion of it, but we'll try to wing this and make this work. And I am trying to start from the beginning there. We all recognize probably this information, the Climate Act, and the ambitious goals. And we don't need to spend much time on that. Understandingly that last year, an additional, I believe it was 10 gigawatts was proposed to add to this ambitious level. So we have a lot of work to do. First, I guess we should introduce my team. And I've been promoted to principal, so I'm the principal environmental analyst. And I have a staff of the Farmland Protection Working Group. And my specific work in the past has been concentrated on public service law cases, not only the transmission cases that you probably see active, but the Article 10 cases and now the 94C cases. The other more important for or more applicable to this group may be more of the 305A cases, or the 305 cases that would be the notice of intent, and that would be for projects 25 megawatts or less. And we've all know that this is, we have a target on ag land, and mainly because they're flat, clear of trees, and just being associated with these projects, the clearing is a major undertaking. In construction, we've cleared 3 projects to date on large scale renewables. Obviously, it's not bait, it's bat issues. The previously disturbed label that's put on ag land also is enticing for solar developers. I guess it's controversial to some degree. Rotational cropland does limit the threatened endangered grassland bird habitat concerns and wintering raptor concerns if it's rotated frequently. Also, well-drained characteristics are attractive. It reduces the wetland impacts and wetland mitigation. And obviously the close proximity to transmission lines, and in this case, distributed energy or 3-phase energy. So our stance has always been pretty much the same on any conversion, but our agency is tasked to preserve agricultural land for the production of food and fiber. This is the New York State Constitution. We've referred to this several times in testimony. Again, in ag markets law, it says the same thing in a little bit more words, but again, it's we see that there's a lot of ag land in jeopardy being lost, and we want to preserve it. That leads to a host of other issues. In concert with both of those pieces of legislature, our basic siting goal is to preserve the highest valuable soils, agricultural soils for food and fiber. When we get to siting, it can be a little tricky. Obviously, we have the New York State Certified Agricultural Districts, and this is Montgomery County. And this is a representation of the ag districts in this county. It's really heavily farmed, and we see assortment of projects here that I've labeled. But as far as siting goes, Ag and Markets also looks at the prime farmland, and this is similar to what was presented before. This county has very little prime farmland. So in the past, we've cited projects or approved projects that are largely acceptable because of the amount of, or the lack of prime farmland, also known as mineral soil groups 1 through 4. This slide is just to recognize that as much as the CLCPA initiatives are pumping out tons of money for solar and wind initiatives, energy storage, there's a lot of money being spent in ag, and Ag and Markets hosts a variety of grants, and may not be well understood, but we're essentially a parent agency for the soil and water conservation districts, and those programs and grant opportunities are distributed throughout the districts to apply for and receive state funding, and that happens through our division of Land and Water. So I don't want to talk about the large scale projects. I believe we're more focused on the smaller scale, but this is the law where it discusses that Ag and Markets is a statutory party, like similar to 94C. I think the priority for this group is to discuss the notice of intent process. That's in the 305 Ag and Markets law. 25 AA is Ag District, and 305 under that is the where we talk about ag, the notice of intent. Basic qualifications are it has to be in with the Ag District, it has to be greater than an acre, and it has to have some sort of government funding. And in these cases, that's NYSERDA. Basically said that there is a process. It's a 60, we're supposed to be notified 65 days prior to the construction or an action. And then we have a 30-day window to respond as far as if an application's complete or incomplete. And then there's another 60-day review periods. The problem with this program, and I've talked to a lot of folks that wonder why we can't have more authority here, is that NYSERDA informs the department of these projects because they are the agency funding a considerable amount of money to these projects. And their defined action is actually when they issue payment and not when they award a project. So, and a lot of times, by the time we get a chance to review projects, the location of the interconnections to the utility grid, that's all been nailed down with the utility. And, you know, siting or alternative locations of redesign of facilities obviously is kind of set in stone at that point, and we don't get a whole lot of traction when we come at the 11th hour and say, no, we want you to move it across to the less productive ag field. So there's some issues with the program, but that's where we would encourage municipalities to get us more involved with the seeker process. We don't see a whole lot of feedback from the EPF, the EAF. So that's what we've been telling municipalities. Get us involved earlier on so that we can make siting suggestions. I just threw this in because it was one of the slides that was lacking, or I lost apparently. NOI tracking, we've been doing this since 2019 when this law came into effect. Since then, we've recorded 320 projects in the Ag District, which totals about 8,900 acres, and 36% of that has been in a prime farmland or mineral soil groups 1 through 4. Now, this doesn't count all of the solar projects on ag land not in the ag districts. And we did some investigation from utilizing the Speedy's general permit, the construction general permit from DEC. We identified 113 projects that obviously aren't in the ag district and were ag conversions. We don't have statistics on megawatts or anything like that for those. Aside from that, we have the large scale renewables, which to date is 36 projects of solar. And that's concerning the Article 10 and 94C. And that's over 6,000 acres to date. And with all of these calculations, it's not really considering the orphaned agriculture areas, the corners of the field and the setback areas that aren't typically considered the facility footprint. And I guess we'll get into more of that. A takeaway is, you know, we calculated, it's very rough, using a very generous conservative 5-acre multiplier. It's like 25,000 acres so far, but that's not involving those orphaned ag areas or environmental conservation law mitigation lands. And so we're still generating numbers on that, but considering 25,000 acres and the past 8 years, talking to our conservation easement professional here in the office, he's been working on agricultural conservation easements for 26 years, and we have yet to complete 100,000 acres of conservation easements. That's not counting Farm Bill or anything like that. It's just state conservation, like FPIG. Construction mitigation, we're out there in construction. We're ensuring that all of these projects that are either NOI or large scale renewables are following our construction mitigation. And that brings up a point of whether a project is temporary or permanent. And most of the time, each case is identifying themselves as a temporary impact to agriculture. Therefore, when a project is decommissioned, it will be restored to agriculture. And therefore, they should be following our construction mitigation inside the fence as well as outside. There's links to our website here, but generally, these are the areas that it covers. It's very similar to our other construction. I have a pretty large background in constructing renewables, and that's how we developed this, is from experience, knowing the routine and repetitive impacts of solar construction. These guidelines were also written with NYSERDA's partnership. So we together agreed upon these guidelines and have published them, and they are utilized on all ag district and large scale renewable projects. So I just jotted down, this is a few missing slides here that I just did while Michaela was talking. High level concerns, temporary versus permanent. We've discussed that. Farmers versus farmland. We're in an awkward position here because we're attempting to preserve farmland, and that often contradicts what the farmers want or the farm operators want. So in the eastern side of New York, we're seeing that we have that contradiction, where in the western part of New York, where it's more of an issue of evicting rental farmers. And that most recently has happened. And there's concerns not only with farmers being able to generate what they need for commodities, but also their nutrient management planning, and spreading of manure. It makes things very complicated. Solar developers out competing farm leases. Again, that's very similar to the eviction. When you're getting $1,500 to $2,000 an acre for a solar lease, that's pretty good change for a 30 to 40 year project. Environmental conservation law mitigation, primarily grassland birds and wintering raptors is a growing concern, and which ties into the AGM mixed signals, and rightfully so. We try to push these developments outside of the prime farmlands, but when we go into the less productive farmlands, it has an accelerated or elevated construction mitigation awareness for subsurface drainage, and that also gets into the environmental conservation law, because these lands are primarily grass. And so that's the grassland bird mitigation that has to be followed, and which has doubled project sizes because of the need for mitigation. So there's some issues between that. One of our most acceptable projects was is the highest converter of agricultural lands, but it was all low quality, low productive ag lands. So I always put it to my my higher ups here in the department to say, well, is what we want, or do we still want to push for the prime farmlands? Now, we talked about setbacks a little bit. I believe, oops, excuse me. This kind of illustrates the setback issue, where we have an array developed, and there's just a ton of setbacks for municipal use, and also shading setbacks. And all this land is, in theory, could continue to be utilized for agriculture production, but we haven't seen that as of yet. A lot of times this is idle land, and it's the whole parcel is converted. And finally, co-use. If I haven't gone over my time yet, this image is the latest co-use plan that we've accepted. It deals with a 2P racker panel, and the panels offer the ability to have that 42-foot post spacing. And in that, within that condition, this co-use plan is offering the production of crops and manure injection, where other infrastructure with less a reduced spacing hasn't been able to do. So this is setting the bar pretty high in our respect, and we would like to push this, throughout the state, and use that as the example. The general message on co-use is that it must produce a commodity, and I think a lot of them are not, and there's a lot of proposals with conservation practices which are encouraged, but that doesn't mean it's a co-agricultural use. Things like carbon sequestration, and those are great great conservation practices, but unless you have a commodity, it's not ag. Apiary and pollinators, they go hand in hand, and we encourage apiary, but we're really focusing on a use that utilizes the soil resource. So crop production or hay production, that's kind of the target goal. And grazing is a wonderful idea. I think we've been stereotyped that we don't like sheep. That's not true. We just have to make sure that there's a commodity from those sheep, and not a biological lawnmower. So looking over my chicken scratch notes, I think I've kind of hit everything, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you for rolling with a presentation challenge, and sticking with us tonight. Our third speaker tonight is Luke Gianforte, and he's a partner at Gianforte Farms, and he's also, as you know, many of you know, an alternate on the Town of Cazenovia Zoning Board of Appeals. So Luke and I are going to do a little, as opposed to a presentation, we're going to do a little question and response for you tonight. and then we'll lead right into a broader Q&A session for all of our panelists. So first, I'll welcome Luke, and I'll let him introduce himself and his background a little bit. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. My name's Luke Gianforti, and we operate Gianforti Farm. We farm about 800 acres here in town of Cazenovia, Sullivan, and Manlius. It's all certified organic and producing a wide range of different crops on different lands. So that's kind of what we do.
And are you farming on all owned property or on a combination of owned and leased properties?
We're on a combination of owned and leased properties. And I think that's one of the things that was mentioned earlier and kind of a big issue with this solar. I looked up some statistics, and in the United States, 54% of all the cropland is rented land. So the majority of the land that people operate is rented. And I would say that I would estimate that holds true in Madison County as well, if not a little higher number. And many of those landlords are non-producers or don't have an agricultural background either. So that it brings a whole nother level of complexity into siting solar on farmland when you throw that in the mix.
Right. So from your perspective as someone, working and stewarding your lands, what are best practices for siting commercial solar on agricultural lands?
I think some of the things like Jason mentioned and Michaela mentioned, trying to site them in the proper place. And if you're going to use is your goal to use the whole farm, or is your goal to use just a portion of a field? And trying to take into account not only the soils, but the slope of the land, and then field shape has a huge impact too, from a producer's perspective, in terms of how efficient you can be getting in and out of that field and working it. So if it's an odd shaped triangular field in a back corner that's on a side hill, I think that would be a more suited place for placing solar versus a flat, perfectly square field. Obviously, the solar developers would prefer the square flat field, but and I think a lot of this needs to come from the landowners themselves, because once the solar companies have made it to any regulatory agency, be it the town board, a planning board, zoning board, or whatever, they've already signed a lease with a landowner, and the landowner, they've kind of already picked a spot and already asked to be connected to the grid. So a lot of that stuff's already happened by the time it gets to a regulatory agency.
So in your opinion, if you think about, right sizing commercial solar on Cazenovia area farms, how many acres is too small, too big? Why?
I don't necessarily think there's an acreage number per se. I think it has to do more with the land, land shape, soil class, and all that, more so than acreage. I thought Jason's that map he showed there was a good example of how it can kind of go wrong. There were a lot of places on that field that were still technically not covered in solar panels, but are no longer viable farmland, even though they don't have solar panels on, because they're an odd shape, they're not very wide. With an increased cost of labor in New York State and across the country, we're seeing producers having to become more and more dependent and get larger and larger equipment to be able to cover the same amount of land in a faster time period. And that also plays into the changing climate. We have less windows to do the work that we need to do. So being able to cover that ground faster and that field efficiency is a huge topic. And if you're trying to dodge in and out around solar panels and have little blocks of ground or 200-foot buffers along the street, it's just not economically viable or feasible for a producer to still operate that land.
So as someone who is managing farm property in the Cazenovia area, can you give us a little snapshot on, what's happening here on the ground in Cazenovia in our community? What kind of pressure are farmers under to sign leases? How do you have a sense for how many farmers are interested and why they're interested or why not?
I think a lot of it depends on the grid and the infrastructure, as to if you've been approached or not. I'm sure most people have been approached that have suitable power infrastructure at the road, that has the capacity. Approached many different ways. There's been plenty of letters sent out, um, draft letters or um, boilerplate letters asking for interest, um, and then the draw to the farmers, it depends on what position they're in. The past right now the commodity markets are currently a little higher than they have been in the past, so things are better. But a couple of years ago, everything was really depressed prices, and the value that a lot of the solar leases are offering is much higher than you can average in terms of profitability on an acre of farmland year in and year out. So it's kind of from a business perspective, it's hard to say no. Um, and then also many people don't see it as many producers don't have retirement savings, and their land is their retirement. And so this way is a way for them to keep their property, and generate some revenue without having to do the work. um, or if they don't have a next generation, another way to do something, as some people view it as another crop. So that adds some tricky parts to it, and it kind of ties back to the rented versus owned land. A landlord maybe can get, I probably 10 times the amount of rent from a solar developer as they could from a farmer. And for them, if they're really looking at it as a from an economic point of view, it's kind of a no-brainer to go with the solar because it's like guaranteed money for the next 25 to 30 years.
Other speakers address that topic of commercial solar installations on leased versus owned farmland, and you've spoken to it a little bit here in your response to the last question. When you look at that question and some of the considerations around that Michaela raised in her presentation, for example, how are you seeing that play out here in Cazenovia and the surrounding areas, and how, knowing with your understanding of how much farmland is rented and how many producers are leasing a certain amount of their lands, how do you see that playing out here?
I think it will be the biggest challenge for the dairy producers, because of their nutrient management. They have to have that land, and it has to be close by to the farm for them to truck manure there. And so when they lose that land, it's just not economically viable. They may be able to pick up more land to feed the cows 10 miles away, but it's just not viable to move the manure that far. And they really need to be mindful of their nutrient management, which they all are, in terms of where the best places to put it. And that prime farmland um, can produce more crop, and therefore it needs some more nutrients. So they can move more manure onto that land than other land. But if they don't have anywhere to put the manure, it really limits their operation, and you could see farm size start shrinking because they just have nowhere to go with it.
There is burgeoning interest in exploring agrivoltaics, and our previous speakers have addressed that just briefly. And in some cases, solar energy proponents are presenting that as a win-win. How applicable do you think co-location of commercial solar and agriculture is to Madison County and Cazenovia area farming practices, both now or potentially in the future?
I don't see it happening with the existing businesses in this area. I don't think there's very many businesses that could adapt to that or utilize the land like that. Grazing land, from my understanding, it has to be mostly sheep are the only thing that can really graze under the solar panels and not do too much damage to the infrastructure. And there's just not that much market demand for it. I think it creates opportunity for producers to start businesses using sheep or something like that to graze under them. But I don't really view that as an agricultural commodity, as Jason was referring to. It's not really producing an agricultural commodity. It's more creating a business to provide a service to a solar developer using livestock. So I struggle to see that really becoming feasible on a larger scale. A small project here or there may be possible, but on a larger scale, I don't see it happening, in my opinion.
Before we move to the broader Q&A session, is there anything else that you'd like to comment on tonight, Luke? Either other things that you'd like to share with this group or some comments on Michaela or Jason's materials?
I thought I've read through Michaela's report, and I thought it was a really great report. And I would encourage anyone else interested in it to look through it. I think they have a lot of great data that Michaela touched on, and some really good ideas on how to protect farmland while still meeting the state's climate goals. So.
Thank you very much. So at this point in the presentation, I'd like to thank all three of our panelists. Thank you, Michaela, Jason, and Luke. And we'd like to open it up to all of you for some questions from the audience. And I noticed that Michaela just posted a link to that recently released American Farmland Trust report into the chat. We will also post a link on the Beyond Rooftop Solar website when we post the recording of this session as well. You're welcome to, if you have questions, you can submit them in the chat. If your question is for a particular speaker, then please indicate that will help us out. Or you're welcome to use the hand raise feature or unmute yourself and ask your question.
I got a question actually in the chat that I wanted to address during this portion.
Perfect.
Someone sent it in earlier. The question was, can I explain more about mitigation funds and where they come from? And would local governments have control over these funds? So to answer your question, the mitigation fees would be paid by solar developers depending on the number of acres of prime farmland that they're impacting. And what we propose is kind of that money. So our framework we designed with more of the state level policy in mind. So our intention would be that the mitigation funds would be collected by NYSERDA, who already collects mitigation fees, but our system is just, our fees are a bit higher, and we tie the cost to farmland protection so that the money that is being collected can actually be used to mitigate the impacts to farmland in the region that is hosting the solar project. So be collected by NYSERDA, and we recommend that most of this money should be earmarked of basically, this is for farmland protection. You know, we're impacting farmland. Now we're going to turn this money right around and protect farmland and try and keep that money as locally as possible. There are couple different ways that could be done to do that. Either, you know, earmarking it for REDC regions. So, you know, money's coming from Central New York and it's going right back to Central New York. Or yeah, so that is kind of how we go about it in the report. However, when it comes to local applications, one piece of it is that there should be some money put aside for agricultural viability, because it's wonderful to protect farmland. Farmland protection is great. It's our bread and butter at AFT. But also, you know, farming needs to be a business that can still exist in a community, and it's important to invest in, you know, succession planning, farmland protection planning, land access, transfer, all of these pieces that keep farming communities healthy. We could definitely see that being a place for, you know, local entities being able to apply for a piece of that money to say, look, it's our community, it's agriculture right here in our back door. We want to support it. Here's our plan, and being able to use the money that way. Obviously, a big priority is spend it as locally as possible. The whole point of mitigating impacts is to actually mitigate the impacts to the best of our ability. So things like county IDAs, county farmland protection boards, we're thinking more locally about host community benefit agreements, how the taxes are structured with the pilot agreements for solar projects. These are also ways to take funds and use them to mitigate impacts to farmland and reinvest in agricultural viability. So there's a little bit more detail on some of those options in our report, but that was our thinking.
We have a question in the chat. Europe is moving forward on agrivoltaics. How well is Cornell or other land grant universities getting involved in research and implementation? Any of our speakers like to address that?
I can attempt, let's say that. We have seen some Cornell pilot studies, and but where we've seen them is on very small scale, and the growing trend across the state is to have larger scale renewables. And so as Luke was discussing the feasibility of having thousands of sheep across New York State may not be that feasible. I do know of other studies in other states, not Cornell. In Vermont, they had a pilot study dealing with cattle grazing, which was very effective, but it was only a 5-acre array. Again, it's just very small scale, and the infrastructure for that particular type of a foundation is quite costly, and solar developers currently haven't explored that. The most recent co-use plan that we've looked at, it's a pilot study, and we approve, although we don't like pilot studies, we approved it just so that we can get the ball rolling to see if this can actually be feasible. And this is the situation where I said it has a 42-foot row spacing with single access row tracking panels, using manure injection and growing crops. it sounds nice on paper, and we would love to see that it either worked on a large scale dairy. This project involves 770 acres available for co-use. And if it works, it'd be very encouraging. If it doesn't, we're going to learn a big lesson. So there's a lot of ideas for co-use, but there's been very little actually implemented on a utility scale.
I'll add on to that with a little bit of extra information too, in case folks aren't as familiar with agrivoltaics. First of all, the names get used interchangeably. You might hear agrivoltaics, you might hear dual use, you might hear co-use. They all kind of point to the same idea of solar energy generation and farm production can happen at the same time on the same piece of land. But they kind of point to different levels of intensity, with agrivoltaics tending to mean kind of crops, basically, under the panels or in between panels. But one of the reasons it's so challenging to implement on a large scale, as Jason was pointing out, is basically it comes down to cost for the developers because of the amount of steel required to build the solar arrays in a way that allows farming activity to continue. Because you might need your panels to be higher so that you can accommodate, a cattle grazing underneath, which means you need more steel to raise them up that high, or you need to space them out so your project area is bigger so you can get the same amount of energy production that you need. So those are some of the reasons that it's challenging. But that being said, as was pointed out in the chat, there is research looking at how do we graze cattle and not just sheep, recognizing that so much of farming America is dairy production and beef cattle, and that this is really what agriculture looks like in America. And also, how can we have combines underneath agrivoltaic systems? So that is some of the research that is being done both in the US and abroad. So this is kind of the early stages of a new and developing field. So just a little extra context, those are some of the challenges. And as Jason said, it's in the beginning phases, but it does have potential and it needs research to come up with a definition that works to make sure that, farmers need to be a part of this equation. You don't just want woolly lawnmowers running around, but also that we are defining this in a way that makes sense, that pays attention to research. And at the end of the day, there's going to need to be incentives for developers as well to cover the additional costs, which is the other half of the equation.
Great, thank you very much, both speakers. Other questions from the group? Phil, I thought I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. So what we're finding in Fenner is that we already have the 20 wind turbines, another 5 have been approved, and we've got a big wind project that's being proposed here. 1,000 acres already leased, as well as the 1,200 acres for solar. So I want to bring our attention to wind a bit. It was a lot of talk about solar, but not a lot of talk about wind, and wind is a big deal, especially in this environment. But I'm proposing this, that one of the major things that's wrong right now is that the companies come in, the private companies come in, they lease the land and they go ahead with their projects, and they say, well, we don't have to really do much. We know that the state new siting organization is going to approve our project, and we don't have to really talk about it too much. And I think what's missing is something that I've done a lot of work on in the past is around a community dialogue. There needs, because of the complexity, I mean, listening to everybody, it's just brilliant to hear everybody talk tonight. I learned so much. Because of the complexity of these decisions, it's not like, oh, let's just put up some solar panels. There's many aspects to it as they go up, that there needs to be a really systematic dialogue with the major parties in any given town. And there needs to be a defined process. And I think the government should sponsor not only the development of a dialogue process that could be used by every town to come in and have the conversation with the private sector, with the town elders, with the zoning, with planning, with the farmers, et cetera, and that the goal be that to reach some common ground. There isn't a common ground here. They come in, then there's war. There's a civil war happens in the middle of the town. You know, it's like, that doesn't help anybody. Just everybody's angry and pissed off and putting up signs saying no solar and all that kind of stuff. So what's missing is any kind of human conversation about this, where the people can be strategic and say, hey, let's look at all this and see what we can figure out together. How can it work for everybody, and shoot for that. I would, I think, like in the scoping plan and all these processes, that what's missing is any kind of systematic conversation among the major players where we can actually talk about this stuff. So I just think that's really important. I don't know what you think of that idea, but I think it should have merit. I think if the town gives its stamp of approval to a project, then maybe that project moves up in the queue, and gets approved more quicker than projects that don't have a community input and a conversation, something like that.
So it sounds like, I think we're talking about a couple of different things here in terms of, talking about those projects that are, Phil, I think you're thinking a little bit more about the ORES cited projects, things that are permitted through that Office of Renewable Energy, those 20 megawatt or 25 megawatt and larger projects, as opposed to those projects that are approved at the municipal level. I might open it up here if any of our town councilors, I see a couple of you on the call tonight, or other members of the Town of Cazenovia Solar Committee would like to speak just briefly to the Town of Cazenovia's process as part of reviewing and amending the code here in our community.
Well, first, this is Bob Riddler. I'm on the town planning board, and also I was a member of the solar committee, which worked to prepare our solar law and solar guidelines. And first, thank you so much, Jen, for sponsoring this meeting tonight. And the presenters did an outstanding job, I think, bringing information to everyone. With lots of questions, lots of answers and information. I think our solar committee did an outstanding job trying to create a law that goes a long way toward giving the community input into the solar projects that will be developed here in Cazenovia. And I think the dialogue that Jason talked about certainly is facilitated by our law and our guidelines. We have public hearings and so forth. So I think we're in good shape.
I see, Tom, you have a question in the chat. Can I put that on hold for just a moment while we follow this thread a little bit further? Phil, you kind of spoke to this question of community conversation and community involvement in the process, greater awareness in the process. Bob spoke to that a little bit as far as the Town of Cazenovia Solar Committee and the work that group has done to think about the complexities in some level of detail and to engage the community in that process. I think in both cases, I'm hearing a little theme that there's a sense from community members sometimes, and from Ag and Markets, from what I heard from Jason's presentation, that it feels like sometimes there are parties who have an interest that are not necessarily able to engage as early in the process as they would like. And so I'm actually going to circle back to Jason for a moment. And I'm wondering can you just expand a little bit on your comment about your involvement in the NOI, Notice of Intent process, and your timing for getting that notice of intent from NYSERDA. You indicated that you get that information when that action is already defined, not when the action is defined by NYSERDA, but when they issue payment. And so some of those pieces are already set in stone. Just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I can try. We have a gentleman that specializes in NOIs here, but the siting goals and is very similar to any solar project or any other renewable energy development. Yeah, we get notices from NYSERDA because they are the state funding authority for these projects, and we've we've negotiated with them over the years, and we haven't made much headway because we would like to get more notice when projects are awarded and not when they're funded. And I guess I haven't been in the settlement of this topic, but it come down to the fact that their defined legal action is when they issue payment. So we really don't have much to stand on until we get that notice. Now, we do have some review capabilities through Seeker. And when the EAF is filed through Seeker, it has to talk about ag districts. If it's in an ag district, we have a chance to review, but the only time we get that review is if it's followed through. And a lot of times we find that they omit this section, and we'll never be notified until NYSERDA. So there's some error, obviously. And so we have to rely on towns and farmland protection boards to stay on top of this issue. And then we can offer our comments. And that has happened, but not on a regular basis. But I would have to say that, the majority of the time and the majority of the filings we get of the 320 projects recorded, it's really a too late issue. We've found projects that have been at least completely built or in construction while we're reviewing the NOI, and that it's not an efficient process. I understand. Our hands are tied. Now, on the Philip mentioned, the review process. Now, on the larger scale renewables, there is a much thorougher and very planned out in with settlement parties, but under 25 megawatts, those are all seeker determinations. So, and I believe municipalities really pride on their ability for home rule. And when you get to the large scale renewables, the municipalities, in my opinion, are a little slighted because some of their solar restrictions at local law are overruled by the siting board or the ALJs. So I just in for food for thought that home rule is something that should be treasured in New York. The large scale renewables, however, although they take an attempt to satisfy local law, a lot of times I've seen where towns oppose development, they're just overruled. And so.
Well, it turns out Tom's question was very much along the line of of what we just pursued. But the second part of your question, Tom, does Ag and Markets have veto power over NYSERDA's project proposals?
No, no, not really. There is a process, but one state agency fighting against another state authority isn't likely to happen. Um, I have never seen it anyways. Um, it's as much as, ag and markets, we want to preserve farmland, we have to have the, uh, the intent of the state as well. And so it really hasn't got to that level yet. Although some of us wish it would at times. No, we don't have veto power.
And then last question that I see in the chat so far is also related. This is from Lori. Isn't the awarding of projects by NYSERDA a matter of public record that ag and markets can access?
So I believe even the awarding in the initial stages is a matter of public record, yes. But it's the definition of action. It's really legalese to understand that they're not making an action until they pay the developer what they're awarded. And that's kind of getting into beyond my comfort level, because I mainly deal with the large scale renewables. But yeah, that's as much as I really know. Without our counsel further defining it.
Any other questions for any of our panelists this evening?
While people are mulling things over, two comments. One, Phil, I think you've been reading my scoping plan comment notes. 'Cause I was like, yep, that's in my outline already. So that's good. Feel like I'm on track with, yeah, totally in agreement that, definitely, how can we support least conflict siting processes? If communities can agree on something, that should absolutely get moved up the queue as a priority for siting if it has pre-existing support. But the piece I wanted to chime in with was more of a advisory to keep your eyes peeled in the coming months, because there's going to be a new round of solicitations for energy project proposals from NYSERDA. And as part of that, they're trying there's a new component this year. It's kind of in a pilot phase, so it doesn't have any teeth yet, but there's a smart solar siting scorecard that they've been working to develop with a bunch of folks. AFT has been part of that process, New York Farm Bureau, a bunch of solar developers, but it's basically looking at, with these large scale projects specifically, these really big ones, kind of awarding points basically for, are you avoiding farmland? Is it making sure that we're not siting solar on high quality farmland and actively farmed land? So that scorecard in its kind of first draft version is going to be included in this new solicitation that's coming out in a couple of weeks now. And I believe there might be public comment, but at the very least, it should be food for thought with how they go about it and ways that can be adapted potentially. So I just want to flag that, and I will send that to Jen when I get my hands on it. But there are, I do want to give folks a silver lining. I have found working on this issue now over the past year and change that it's really stressful and it's really frustrating, because there is so much renewable energy development that is happening now and expected to keep on coming. And we all know so intimately how important it is to protect farmland. But I want to emphasize that there are a lot of people working on this issue, and also that I think that tension is recognized and encapsulated in a lot of efforts all the way up, from the local to the state level, with the work of Ag and Markets and NYSERDA, and also the Office of Renewable Energy Siting as well. So yeah, I do want to add that piece to this conversation, because it's really easy, I think, to get quite frustrated, because it's a frustrating process. But keep chiming in and pushing, but also know that there is some movement happening.
Thank you, Michaela. And actually, while you're still kind of in speaker mode here, I was just going to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about where you are. So you have proposed in your report this incentive system, or maybe or a sticks and carrots approach, perhaps. But where does that stand in terms of state buy-in, NYSERDA buy-in on that? What's the status of the conversation there?
So we've been working to incorporate a lot of these ideas into the scorecard and kind of working it in there. Obviously, one piece that we are definitely focused on is the need to increase the mitigation fee so that it really does provide incentive or disincentive, as it were, to really guide how projects are being cited and what kind of land they're going on. That one's a bit of an uphill battle, even with the existing mitigation regime, which is a flat $1,000 an acre of prime farmland. Doesn't matter where in the state you are or how many acres your project is impacting it, it's just a flat fee. So we're saying, no, if you're impacting a large amount, then you should be paying more. If it's really high quality farmland, your cost should be commensurate to the cost of protecting farmland in that region where you're building. So that one I think will be the work of many years to get that number up. But the basic ideas of we should not be siting on prime farmland. We should be avoiding active farmland. We should be mindful of impacts to farmer renters. Those are being incorporated into existing decision-making structures. So.
Great, thank you very much. One last question just came into the chat. Does ORES have the ability to overrule the environmental requirements in 94C?
Well, ORES, they issue the standard permit conditions. And so they have a set of conditions that they would generally administer on every project. And if there was something that was not well suited for a particular project, there could be a separate permit condition or a project specific condition added. As far as environmental regulation, no, environmental conservation law must be upheld. We, as Ag and Markets, in being a statutory party to that process, we hold tight to those permit conditions and those requirements, for better or for worse. And sometimes we would ask for an additional condition depending on the site specifics. So that's as much as, but they won't overrule environmental regulation.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to wrap it up here because I'm mindful of the time and our speakers' time tonight. But if questions arise as you've had a chance to think about some of this, feel free to email them to me. And we'll be happy to kind of reach out to presenters and see if we can seek an answer or continue the dialogue. So I thought before we close tonight, I just want to give you a little primer on what's next with regard to thinking about commercial solar in Cazenovia. We are hosting one more event that's planned already in this series. That will be next Thursday evening, April the 28th at 7 p.m., also via Zoom. That session is more focused on the economics and industry perspective on considerations relating to the siting and municipal level permitting processes for commercial solar projects less than 25 megawatts. Okay. So we'll consider things like project scale, incentives, site constraints, mitigation measures, how those play a role in project viability. And it will also outline the basics of pilot agreements, which is payment in lieu of taxes, host community benefit agreements, and decommissioning requirements. Our speakers for that panel will be Phil Hoffmeyer, Associate Professor and Chair of the Environmental and Renewable Resources Division at SUNY Morrisville. If you joined us on the first session, you heard from him during that session as well. Our second speaker for next Thursday evening will be Michael Frateschi. He's the engineer and president for TGA Clean Energy, the developer for the solar project in New Woodstock on Barrett Road. And our third speaker next Thursday evening will be John Lange, Town of Cazenovia attorney, and he'll be walking us through the ABCs, pilot agreements, HCBAs, and decommissioning. So in addition to our next speaker series event, there is a public hearing on the draft solar law. This will be the third public hearing, and that will be during the Town of Cazenovia board meeting. That's Monday, May the 9th at 7:30 p.m. I did notice that there is a Zoom link up for that as well. And we will, if you're looking for more information, the materials that Michaela shared in the chat this evening, links to those reports, we will make sure that those are posted to the Beyond Rooftop Solar website, along with the recording of tonight's session. Give us a day or two and we'll get it all up there, okay? So in closing, thank you very, very much to our co-hosting organizations. That would be the United Climate Action Network, Cazenovia Area Community Development Association, and the Cazenovia Chamber of Commerce for helping to identify some of the knowledge gaps and build a framework around these emerging themes. Thank you very much to our presenters, to Michaela, to Jason, and to Luke for their time this evening. And thank you to all of you for being engaged and participating constructively in some discussion around this topic. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Bye all. Thank you so much for letting me present.
Thanks, Michaela. Thank you, Jason. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.